The Sannin, the heroes of the Second Great Shinobi War, arguably having the highest level of reputation among all the shinobi world, once fighting and surviving a fight with even Hanzo the Salamander, the man who dreams of conquering all 5 great nations under his mighty rule. However, that would of course mean beating and killing all of the Kage. So what if the 3 Sannin would be put in his place in an all-out battle against the 5 Kage of the modern era? Not counting the Boruto era, obviously, because that's just like too obvious. Hey yo, what's good y'all? It's Virtue, and I'm not going to dibble dabble too much on the intro, but essentially it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an all-out fight between Tsunade, Orochimaru, and Jiraiya with all their abilities and jutsu, such as Jiraiya having access to Sage Mode, versus the 5 Kage, with A having access to like the V2 cloak and so on and so forth. Now originally I was going to have 2 rounds, giving the Sannin like a bit of more an advantage in the second round, but there's not much of a chance that the Sannin actually lose this fight in the first one. So yeah, the Sannin win this, but let's just jump straight in. So recently I've discussed the 5 Kage like quite a bit, so for this video let's delve into the question of how strong are the Sannin. The Sannin are all students of Hiruzen Sarutobi, the man hailed as the strongest Hokage ever, the professor, with Orochimaru also possessing all 5 great nature transformations, showing pure generational levels of talent, so much talent in fact that the databook claims that all of Hiruzen's knowledge and jutsu is no match for Orochimaru's talent. Many are quick to also note that the first databook stating that if Hiruzen was in 10 years younger, the outcome could have been quite different, but even in his old age, Hiruzen Sarutobi is stated to be the strongest of all 5 Kage. Kabuto outright says this, and we have like other medians as well like that corroborate this idea that Hiruzen is above the 5 Kage. When Hiruzen was reanimated, he was also able to like outperform all the 5 Kage against the Guru statue. Granted, this is a fatigued 5 Kage who just exited a battle with Madara Uchiha, and we are unsure of like how much they were actually healed. Same goes for Hiruzen though, like potentially as well, like depending on your interpretation of the Edo Tensei, like yes, it makes him weaker, but it probably gives him a better chakra pool, like with his alive self being like prohibited in stamina and whatnot. But either way, again, there are statements of Hiruzen just outright being above all the nations. And if I remember, the fanbook also says the Hokage stands atop of everything, which would include them. So yeah, if it's not obvious already, old Hiruzen is like above the 5 Kage, at least individually, which is typically my interpretation. I usually don't think they could actually just solo all 5 at once. This is particularly paramount for the Sannin scaling as well, since we know that Orochimaru is capable of reacting to Hiruzen's attacks even after gaining his resolve and clashing with Kenjutsu attacks and whatnot against Orochimaru. One thing that many people failed to mention though is when Orochimaru uses the Edo Tensei, we can actually see him use the signs for the jutsu that Tobirama and Hashirama were actually using. This lends credence to the idea of like why Hashirama and Tobirama are very relative, and why Tobirama didn't use like FTG and whatnot, because Orochimaru just doesn't know those signs and whatnot. But what this means is that all the times where Orochimaru was reacting for them, this would actually be a reaction feat for Orochimaru, showing his like relativity to an old man Hiruzen. So you don't just have to take like his body fighting Orochimaru, I guess, or Hiruzen, sorry, if you will. Orochimaru was also nerfed in this battle as well, and was suppressed at the idea of battling his sensei that he once adored, literally stabbing himself to prevent himself from crying. Orochimaru in character also never straight up just uses the Edo Tensei in battle, but chose to do it here since he still has lingering feelings for his old master, if you will. This means that when fighting the Gokage, you could say that Orochimaru might not use them off start, but would rely on his own power. And maybe you could argue that due to Orochimaru noticing the numbers game, he would place them in battle straight off start and whatnot, but either way, I digress. So maybe you could argue that yes, if Hiruzen was younger, he could have killed Orochimaru, but maybe if Orochimaru was suppressed, or wasn't suppressed, I guess, the same thing could be said, and that he could have just killed Hiruzen. Maybe you could say that since Orochimaru fear has Kakashi, and Kakashi is called the strongest ninja in Konoha in the first data book, so Orochimaru just slams Hiruzen with no nerf or something like that. So, before we move on to Jiraiya, we also know that Orochimaru is potentially one of the most diverse shinobi in the entire world. Orochimaru gained most of his fear surrounding his name from his diversity, with rivalries such as Deidara and Sorcery and whatnot, but we know that Orochimaru has access to many different techniques to utilize, whether that be his giant supreme summon, being Manda, who can even overtake Katsuyu and Gamabunta at once, or Orochimaru's bodily numbing poison, which was even like posing a threat to heavy Sasuke? Or how about one of Oro's most underrated abilities, his frightening fear hacks? This fear hacks worked on Kakashi harder than anybody else in the entire series. Just seeing Orochimaru before him, Kakashi was so scared that he preemptively activated his Chidori prior to lifting the Sharingan, which I'm pretty sure this is the only time this happens in the entire series, if I do remember correctly. With Kakashi, just seeing his head roll down on the ground. Another more or less talked about instance is when Orochimaru was sick and he has no arms at all and still scared Kabuto, who's been like stated many times to be on that Kakashi-esque level. So there's really like no shinobi in Konoha at the time of the Konoha crush that could really compete with Orochimaru. So I've heard some people talk about that it could be implied that the Raikage was actually scared of Orochimaru following Hiruzen's death. So those may work on him as well and whatnot, if you do like subscribe to that, of course. He also has access to many other types of snake summons, whether those be like the little ones he makes waves out of, or the actual 8-headed Hydra that is even stated to be like Orochimaru's most powerful form, even exceeding himself. The third data book straight up saying as much, with it also stating that it's the largest and most powerful of all the snake summons. Some have like argued that it could be slower than base Orochimaru due to like how much sheer mass it has. And we do have a few distinctions between power and speed throughout the series, which I'll just throw on screen. Either way, even if you do want to say it's slower, with the combined might of like Tsunade and Jiraiya, he definitely should be able to at least take a Kage or two out here. And that's being generous to the Kage if he happens to go into the Hydra. With the only ones really being able to do something, I think, is version 2A or maybe Inoki. And Inoki is actually really powerful in the war. I just talked about him in my last video, with his village actually being the only one that was capable of stopping the Ninetales attack, with, you know, maybe Hanzo or whatnot. But anyway, which I do recommend you go check out that video. But either way, I digress. Inoki is able in the war, is able to vaporize the entire Susanoo and like its clones and whatnot, and was even like a threat to MS Sasuke. So you could definitely argue that in battle the particle style could be faster and would just destroy the Hydra. But finishing off Orochimaru real quick, he does again have the Edo Tensei Kage that could come out. And if you take the anime as canon, he also has the third Kase Kage as well, which these most definitely could pose a threat to all the Kage if they came out. One of the Sannin would then have the numbers game, and two, they can also be skilled to like Hiruzen, which is again above the 5 Kage. And I hate to keep beating on A, but people really tend to overestimate his ability sometimes, or argue that he's like way out of the equation, since we can see like he's like training on panel as the Raikage, and I mean, sure, but you need to understand that yes, the other great nations have strong leaders, but Konoha is generally considered to like sit at the top of the entire world, as I mentioned earlier, with the fan books basically stating as much. This is very much crucial, since we know that all the Sannin have at one time or another been offered the position of Hokage. Other non-biased medians also imply that the Sannin are at least comparable to the other like Hokage actually prior to Hiruzen, which is crazy, but it could just be chopped up to like the Edo Tensei ones and whatnot, and like Kishimoto not really having a full grasp on how strong he wanted Hashirama or Tobirama to be. Even when you delve into the war arc though, this does remain consistent, with Tsunade being, dare I say, above the Raikage. Now, I'm going to start to delve into what Tsunade could bring to the table in the war arc. However, we can see that Tsunade was confident in fighting the Raikage, and when considering how we know that Jiraiya and Tsunade are at least like relative to this Orochimaru, with the Konoha section of the third data book stating that it would take a Sannin to beat another Sannin, and I mean Ebisu also states the same thing, so maybe this could imply or it could be used for like the 5 Kage as well. But regardless, it kind of adds to the idea that they are all relative, and there's also many other implications of relativity, like how Pain places Orochimaru and Jiraiya as equals or in the same caliber and whatnot. So Tsunade should also be able, probably honestly should have been able to stop the Raikage if she wanted to during the war arc. This remains consistent with Tsunade Loki outperforming A in the war arc, only a few chapters later, with Madara outright stating that she is stronger than A, but slower. However, is this true? Well, I mean, sure. But the one Madara is like referencing is he is a lightened version 2 Raikage, not just a normal one. And even then, Tsunade is still relative to the Raikage being able to combo and counterattack with that lightened A. So I honestly could see an argument for Tsunade being faster than a normal V2 Raikage, and potentially being the strongest of all the 5 Kage. I don't like personally have that interpretation, but it's definitely there, which means that yes, Tsunade could also bully the Kage, but more importantly, it means that Jiraiya and Orochimaru had the best medic on their team to help combo with them or to heal them. That numbing gas that I mentioned earlier for Orochimaru could come into play here with Tsunade like just running through it and punching and just healing from the numbing poison with her cells just, dividing or what have you. So some nasty combos could definitely be coming. Now this is a little side note, but the second data book implies that when all the Sannin fight together, all their abilities are like increased times 3. So this could lend credence just to how good their combos can be. And these combos are just ones that the Kage have no counters to. Another thing Tsunade could do is give a small Katsuyu to rest on the other shoulders to heal them throughout the bout, which, I mean, any sort of like medical attention won't really like be provided to the Kage. So we also know that since Tsunade skills above the Raikage, she could definitely be the one to take him out and whatnot, leaving Orochimaru and Jiraiya to battle it out against Onoki, Mei, and Gaara. Which, now, I know that many of you tend to believe that Mei is fodder and very unimpressive, but I will say her water style is actually very like potent, being able to work around Madara's majestic destroyer flame. But even then, we know that Jiraiya and Orochimaru do possess really good earth style, and you could argue that during the middle of the fight, if Orochimaru like does feel like it, or feel like they're not going to beat them too badly, then the Edo Tensei could come out, leaving it to be a 5v4. And Tobirama and Hashirama would scale to Orochimaru, and should be able to take out Mei, and potentially Gaara as well. Now, I will say, being generous to Mei's water style is actually really interesting. I don't really hear many people talk about it, so it could low-key pose a problem to the Edo Tensei, if I'm being completely honest, which could still regen in the War Arc, but Tsunade has shown being able to be blitzed by things such as the Majestic Destroyer Flame, and Mei is able to outperform even 2 ninjutsu before Tsunade can even like move once and whatnot. However, this is a heavily fatigued Tsunade who has been emphasized giving more effort to like bringing down Madara than Mei, and she's probably like given the most effort out of all the Kage, so you could definitely say that Tsunade is more fatigued than Mei. But either way, in combat at full power, she should just outright be above Mei in physical movement speed, again being on par with Orochimaru as claimed in the data book, who just blatantly scales above Mei. Now, yes, we do have some medians claiming that Orochimaru is outright above Jiraiya and Tsunade and even Hiruzen, but regardless, we do have like way more comparisons of them being at least relative. So even if you want to go with the interpretation of him being the strongest Sannin, which I mean is fair, then them being the same level should still be pretty blatant. Even Pain states that whether it's Jiraiya or Orochimaru, any of the Prodigal 3 have very unique abilities, supporting that kind of narrative and whatnot for them to be on that same tier of power, I guess, if you will. Who Jiraiya is really interesting. Now you could, or you should already have like an idea for base Jiraiya of how strong like he is, but the higher stage of Jiraiya, of course, being like Sage Mode, many people do believe that the Hydra and Sage Mode and 100 healings are all like relative, being above like that Sannin tier, kind of surpassing all their base states, still like holding that I guess relativity that they had prior, which is true, granted, but it could definitely be argued with some comparisons that the higher forms could fall under the same precedence and could be stronger than others and whatnot. Now, either way, with Orochimaru's Hydra gaining an astronomical strength buff, with it like being more questionable whether speed is also like in the realm of question and whatnot. With Jiraiya though, this is kind of the opposite. Sage Mode is definitely the biggest speed amp for Jiraiya, being arguably his best attribute whilst in Sage Mode. The reason for this is, well, of course, his strength is quite physically stronger, but some people do believe that since we know the imperfect Sage Mode could potentially lack the sensory as like the Astropath stuff, and I'll just throw this up on screen, you guys can just take your own interpretation. It could also lack that like I guess full strength aspect or full like strength boost that like a perfect Sage Mode would typically give, that like Naruto got and whatnot. And Jiraiya versus Pain is on one of the most misunderstood fights in the entire series, with many people like remember it being a complete and utter stomp in Pain's favor, but to be honest, this is wrong, and Jiraiya actually displayed his power quite well, being able to like react to all the summons in base, easily like evading the crab and whatnot, and once entering Sage Mode, gaining his full resolve, he perception blitzes Pain. Now, I don't think this actually applies to a speed feat for Jiraiya, as we know that Pain could have just been holding back, and we are made like aware of Pain being able to react and combat him later. So like, okay, think of it like this, right? Me and you are in a boxing ring, and you begin to notice my punching pattern and speed at which my punches are being thrown, and you could parry my punches and merely hold your speed back to find, and you're just holding it back to find like a good advantage, and then all of a sudden I just got 10 times faster and just punched you in the noggin. You would obviously be pretty stunned due to the gigantic difference in speed that I just displayed, but now you know that you could parry at a speed much faster rather than the slower previous one that you were parrying me at. Even in the beginning though, when battling against base Jiraiya, Pain gets wrapped in like his hair and is held down and literally still tells Jiraiya that you're going to die. Now, you could also say that since the third data book claims that Jiraiya hardened his resolve in this instance, he was just mental amped and he wasn't like actually on that level, which, I mean, sure, is plausible, but either way, just take it as a feat of relativity, as them just being able to like combat each other, I guess, if you're going to be like more generous. Which does seem consistent when looking a little bit more at some later feats, such as like when the animal path begins falling from the ceiling and begins to weave signs, and just can't really like block Jiraiya's punch. So I think if you were to say that Pain and Sage Jiraiya are relative, I probably wouldn't look at you funny or anything, but it's just that his speed gives Jiraiya the edge, especially in a battle like this where multiple opponents are trying to battle. The ability this is the ability that really gives him the edge, and like the ability that I'm talking about, of course, is Frog Song, which coupled with his speed becomes pretty dangerous. Frog Song is actually called the strongest genjutsu within the third data book, which also has a subsection about Tsukiyomi as well. This genjutsu is performed from Ma and Pa singing on Jiraiya's shoulders, so Jiraiya can still be like fighting and whatnot whilst they capture the Kage and genjutsu. This genjutsu worked on Pain, leading Pain to have a very difficult fight, with the chapter synopsis saying as much, Obito saying he had his hands full, and even Pain saying himself that he wouldn't have won if not for hiding those 3 extra bodies. And that's how I interpret that statement. Now, I know there's other interpretations, but I'm not going to go too into that, since I said I might also do a video on Jiraiya versus Pain. Now, of course, someone could bring up like his Raikage A is like supposedly immune to genjutsu with this lightning cloak, but this is just blatantly false, as Madara genjutsus him like in the work. And we also know that A hears things, so the frequency at which V2 vibrates lets sound into the cloak, meaning that Frog Song would also hit and would beat every single Kage if it were to come out. We also know that Ma and Paul also help like analyze fights, and Paul was able to figure out Pain very casually, so the Kage's plan will more than likely just be worked around. They can even shoot their own jutsu, like Paul has a stream of boiling water that can be shot at very high speeds, and when combined in a 3-way attack with Jiraiya providing oil and Ma providing fire, it creates a boiling oil with fire that can like cover the entire battlefield, which none of the Kage really have answers to unless you use like their respective pseudo flying methods, like when Gaara rides on a sand, or A can jump extreme heights as shown against KCM1. So but he will still have to come down. However, if you grant like the Kage's synergy at this point, then maybe Gaara would save the Raikage and Mei. Since Mei doesn't really have any flight abilities either, maybe you could argue that like her water style could help cool it down and whatnot, but Onuki could fly out of there or lighten the other members just to like have them float in the air, I guess, which is possible considering that the longer this fight wages, the more they will realize how much they need to synchronize and whatnot. So another thing that could arise from this leads like to an advantage and disadvantage. This being, of course, Onuki could ride on A's back and lighten him. The only problem with that is Onuki is consistently the Kage's best asset throughout this entire battle. And if we granted the Edo Tensei coming out, now it's Sage Jiraiya, base Orochimaru, the 2 Edo Tensei Hokage, the 100 healing Tsunade, compared to now Mei, Gaara, and Light and Raikage. Meaning this is now a 5v3 in the Sannin's favor, and Inoki cannot use particle style, which this was the one ability really saving the Kage. Now, if A does deactivate the V2, we can see that Onuki does use like his Mud Golem and whatnot, but A is now ridiculously fast as well if he has his V2 cloak. So is it really a trade-off? Well, I'm going to use this discussion as a way to digress into the combo of how Gaara and Mei and Light and Raikage fight, which is probably different than what you think. We could see that Mei is already on the level of a V1 Raikage, blitzing his combat speed with her lava style, which is pretty consistent. And I'm telling you guys, stop the Mei downplay. Anyway, you can see that her lava style like can melt the Susanoo, which means that if it were to hit the Sannin and whatnot, they wouldn't just like tank it. And you could argue that Mei, it could even burn the Hydra, but either way, we know that once Madara retracts his statement of them being pitiful and claims they're actually really impressive, like literally after seeing the lava style. Now after that, Raikage goes into V2 and gets lightened and absolutely murder blitzes Mu and blitzes Edo Madara, and is able to like crack and manage to break a small subsection of the Susanoo, which is really impressive. Now I'm sure you guys are thinking, wait, if A is doing this, then how are the Sannin going to combat him if he's this fast? Well, to answer that, It's actually really simple. Once Tsunade goes 100 healings, she's able to react to this Raikage and combo attack with him, with her AP still being higher than this like heavy A, I guess. So. And this is shown when they both attack the Susanoo. Her side breaks far easier than his, so you could definitely argue that Tsunade is above him in speed. But to be generous to the Raikage, we'll just say that they are relative in speed and Tsunade is stronger, which means that the other Sannin in their high form should also be able to combat this. And this means that I see no way of Gaara being able to really help out anymore with like these higher level combatants, I guess. And I will say that when A removes V2, Oniki can perform his Mud Golem and stuff, again, as I mentioned earlier. More than likely still can't use Particle Style, as he is still like on the Raikage. But just a little something to note, I guess. But then again, Jiraiya could always use like the Mud Swamp, as he used in the 3-way deadlock, to like lock the Golem in place and to kind of just hold them all down. So yeah, with all that being said, I think the question of who would win the fight between the 5 Kage and the Sannin is much more interesting than how like much of the fandom would like to admit. As well as I hope that I did address some of the Sannin downplay I've been hearing, because I mean that stuff's atrocious. The Sannin are very crazy, and I would be very open to like placing them in more versus matchups, such as like maybe how each Akatsuki duo would do if they were in Pain's place against Sage Jiraiya, which is pretty interesting and whatnot. So yeah, just let me know if you guys want to see some stuff like that or whatnot, or like another idea you guys might have. And well, what do you guys think? Did you think the Kage won, or did you think the Sannin stomp even harder than I alluded to? Either way, make sure to let me know down in the comments below, and consider subscribing, as that does help me out a ton. And as always, love you guys.